Hello, and welcome to Praxis and Theodicy. Today we're going to discuss the sin of usury. This is a big topic, and as there is a lot to tackle, we're going to take it one step at a time. Today we'll be answering the what and why. What exactly is usury, and why is it a topic worth exploring on this channel? We'll talk briefly about the various definitions of usury in a moment. For the sake of filling in an audience unaccustomed to the word, we'll say that usury is an act of economic injustice involving charging interest on loans. In various forms, it is sometimes a sin recognized by Christendom, an injustice recognized by society, and or a crime legislated against by the state. Usury, as mentioned, is a sin recognized by the Church. Being a transgression specifically against economic injustice, it is also a prominent talking point, perhaps by other names, of many leftist ideologies. Like many economic sins, a condemnation of usury is at the heart of Christian dogma, and like many economic practices that favor those with greater wealth or power, the practice of usury is at the core of capitalism. The term usury, and the understanding of it as an act of injustice, has evolved drastically over the centuries, and it is really quite fascinating to trace the ever-changing understanding of usury in the Church and in an ever-evolving society. We are going to look at a variety of ways that usury, as an evil act, has been defined, starting with a broad definition of the word, moving towards more strict and specific definitions. Our first definition. Usury is charging another person for the temporary use of something that you possess. This is the most fundamental meaning of usury, and as such, we will be returning to it. For an example, consider a Blockbuster franchise. The Blockbuster owns many movies on VHS and DVD. You want a movie to watch, so you pay Blockbuster for the service of temporarily using their property, namely, a VHS copy of the movie Adventures in Babysitting. After watching the movie, you are obliged by agreement to return the movie to the franchise location. In the end, you have less money and you possess nothing more than you started with, despite paying money to Blockbuster. Blockbuster now has more money than they started with, and they performed no labor to earn that money. They simply let you temporarily use something that they own. You must give back the borrowed property, as well as additional value which Blockbuster demands. This additional value is referred to as interest when dealing with financial transactions, and as most pragmatic definitions of usury deal with mostly or purely financial transactions, we will be using the term interest from now on. Our next definition. Usury is charging interest on a loan, given in currency, not in other material possessions. This is the most straightforward, traditional definition of usury you're likely to find. I believe it matches closely with our first definition, though I wanted to differentiate an understanding that relates strictly to financial matters by dealing strictly with financial objects, namely currency. This distinction may seem pointless, since currency is simply a human-created tool that is used to ascribe value to things, and therefore anything can be valued in currency anyway. For example, say Blockbuster simply gave you $15 with which to buy Adventures in Babysitting on VHS, and after watching it, you had to give Blockbuster either the VHS as well as $5 for interest on that loan, or you had to give them $20, which is the $15 loan plus $5 or 33% interest. However, one is not wrong to point out that currency is a real thing and it has a use. The use of currency is to be exchanged on the market, while the use of a VHS of Adventures in Babysitting is to entertain oneself for an hour and a half, or longer if you watch it twice. One final note is that there are two factors in this exchange, the loan and the interest. So one might say that to charge interest that is not currency is not usury, say, I loan you $500 on condition that you pay me back the $500 and also give me your bicycle. Or one might say that it is not usury to charge interest in currency on a loan of a non-currency object, as in the Blockbuster example in the first definition. St. Thomas Aquinas made an exception for usury if the loan is of a material object that is not currency, but does not make an exception if the interest charged is of a non-currency object. We will talk more on Aquinas' view in future videos. For the purpose of simplification, we're going to assume, in the rest of our narrowing definitions, that both the loan and the interest charged are stated in currency. The Bible speaks pretty harshly about the practice of usury, that is, charging interest on a loan. Some examples are Ezekiel 18, which includes these quotations. Suppose there is a righteous man who does what is just and right. He does not oppress anyone, but returns what he took in pledge for a loan. He does not commit robbery, but gives his food to the hungry and provides clothing for the naked. He does not lend to them at interest or take a profit from them. Suppose he has a violent son who sheds blood or does any of these other things. He lends at interest and takes a profit. But suppose this son has a son who sees all the sins his father commits, and though he sees them, he does not do such things. He withholds his hand from mistreating the poor and takes no interest or profit from them. He keeps my laws and follows my decrees. Psalm 15, which includes, Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does these things will not be shaken. Leviticus 25:35-37 reads, If one of your countrymen becomes poor and is unable to support himself among you, help him as you would an alien or a temporary resident, so he can continue to live among you. Do not take interest of any kind from him, but fear your God, so that your countrymen may continue to live among you. You must not lend him money at interest, or sell him food at a profit. Luke 6:34-35 says, And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemy, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Usury is charging interest on a loan to a fellow Israelite. Now, this one is a bit specific, but I want to include it here for a few reasons. First, as you will notice from the Leviticus passage that we just read, and from many others in the Old Testament, that God's instruction to not charge usury was specified as a commandment to be carried out in relationship with fellow Israelites, but usury was specifically allowed in transactions with Gentiles. Deuteronomy 23:19-20 says, You shall not charge interest on loans to your brother, interest on money, interest on food, interest on anything that is lent for interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but you may not charge your brother interest. Exodus 22:25 says, If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. This fact is important to note when building a definition of the sin of usury, and will also be important when we discuss the history of usury in a future video. Usury is charging interest on a loan to the poor. This is another specific clause, a hypothetical definition that one might easily build from a holistic reading of the Bible. The gospel narrative, from creation to Jesus, shows a clear message that God's children need to be very committed to proactive economic justice. Those with means are not only called to not charge usury on loans, but they are actively called to lend money to the poor. Psalm 112:5 and Psalm 37:26 are examples of this. God acknowledges that there will be systemic problems which will lead to inequality, and instructs his people to be liquid with their money in their society, lending money eagerly to the poor without interest, so that they might bring themselves out of their circumstances, and thus bring about some equality. The strongest passage to illustrate this complete commitment to economic justice is found in Deuteronomy 15. If among you one of your brothers shall become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care, lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work, and in all that you undertake, for there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. The number of separate passages in Deuteronomy, as well as those from Exodus, Leviticus, and Ezekiel, should give some idea of just how important this was to the Israelites. Jesus expanded on the call to lend money without interest to the poor by suggesting, similar to this passage, that we should lend money without expecting to receive anything in return. Luke 6:34 and 35 say, "And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back." A drawback to this definition of the injustice of usury is the rather inexact definition of who is poor. Could one justifiably give a predatory loan to a middle-class family just because the family isn't poor? Usury is charging interest or profiting on a loan where wealth is not created but only livelihood is maintained. We now move into some more practical theories of what exactly constitutes unjust usury. This rather carefully worded definition is my attempt at defining a view held by distributionists. Distributism is an economic theory that seeks to reform, revise, restrict, and regulate the current capitalist model to cure the cause of much economic injustice. In his essay, "What's So Bad About Capitalism?" Matthew Pelicano states in his thesis, "Distributionists view capital, together with labor and land, as the means of producing wealth, not generating usurious interest payments. Where no wealth is created, no interest can justly be charged. Moreover, where no wealth is created, the means to pay interest are lacking. Any system which ignores this fact fails to recognize reality and is, therefore, unsustainable." To put this simply, there are some things which create wealth, that is, creating a condition or a product for society that wasn't there before. It might be a new way of making and distributing hamburgers, or building a better mousetrap, or a new iPhone, or a robotic arm that performs surgeries. If someone were to invest money into this type of enterprise, the result of the enterprise is a more wealthy, prosperous society. The initial investment, which is known as startup capital, was given by someone who did not work directly on creating the new product or conditions, but they may still share in the wealth that is generated by the new conditions via interest charged on their startup capital, without this interest being considered usurious. A loan that simply goes towards turning the wheels in society without improving upon it cannot justly charge interest, for in this case, when no wealth is created, all it does is cause inflation by creating the appearance of wealth and or simply transfer wealth from someone who needed a loan to get by into the hands of someone who was, at the outset, already rich enough to be handing out loans. Usury is charging interest to private individuals, but merchants, tradesmen, and enterprises are excluded. This is merely a more formalized, practical implementation of the previous definition, but it does provide a distinction that was and still can be helpful. With this definition, we can identify some practices as usurious, such as home mortgages and credit card companies, but can easily identify a non-usurious activity, such as investment in the stock market. Or at least it would be if the stock market were that simple, but we'll get to that. The definition is no longer hinged upon the ends justifying the means, and it could be viewed as non-usurious to charge interest on a loan, even if the loan went to a failed enterprise. It also opens the door for any commercial opportunities, even those which objectively do not contribute to the increasing prosperity of society. This definition, in fact, can lead to an avalanche of loopholes that bring us to an economic system where usury is a fundamental practice. St. Thomas Aquinas described a sort of loophole for charging interest on a loan where the loan was given to a tradesman or a merchant, but we will again discuss St. Thomas Aquinas in a future video. Usury is charging exorbitant interest on a loan, as defined by society or the state or the church or another body. We now arrive at the most common agreed upon definition of usury in use today. Although what is considered exorbitant changes constantly from place to place and from time to time, modern financiers and legislators consider anything over a specific cap to be usurious. Modern precedents from specific court cases have even gone on to erase hard lines such as these, so usury has become less and less of definitively anything at all, other than a vague, unquantifiable suggestion that some loans are predatory or unfair. Some legislators have made attempts to cap interest rates in different areas such as credit card debt or student loan debt, but by and large, the definition of what constitutes usury in today's economic society is largely a question that is left to philosophers. To summarize, the most common understanding of usury today is the practice of charging an unjust, predatory, or exorbitant amount of interest on a loan. The exact details of what makes it unjust is left to philosophers and politicians to argue about. The actual historical definition of usury is the practice of charging interest on a loan whatsoever. In future videos, we will investigate the history of usury, including how it has been handled in different cultures, religions, and time periods. We will talk about usury's relationship to modern economics and, in particular, capitalism. And, most importantly, we will discuss how an understanding of usury can shape a Christian worldview on economic justice.